After dating for 5 years, my fiance told me he wasn't sure about marrying me. Then he joked in front of his friends, "If you were prettier, I'd marry you." This morning, his mom called me in tears. Henry and I had been together for a little over 5 years, engaged for the past 8 months. We first met at a housewarming party through mutual friends. Just two people bonding over a shared frustration with the number 3 and unexpectedly hitting it off. Last summer, he proposed. It wasn't anything grand, just a quiet Saturday morning hike to our favorite overlook. He fumbled with the ring box, his hands unsteady, and before he could even get the words out properly, I said yes. We set the wedding for October and slowly started putting everything together. Well, mostly I planned while he nodded along, barely engaged. About 3 months ago, things started to feel off. Whenever we talked about the wedding, Henry would make strange remarks. When I showed him venue options, he'd shrug and say, "That's a lot of money for just one day." Or, "Do we really need to invite that many people?" At first, I chalked it up to normal concerns about the budget, typical guy behavior. But then came the delayed responses. I'd text him caterer options, and hours later, he'd reply with nothing more than, "Looks fine," or "Whatever you want." When I asked if everything was okay, he brushed me off. Instead, he started spending more time with his work friend, Paul, grabbing beers after work, watching games at Paul's place. None of it seemed outright suspicious, just different, more frequent. And when he came home, he felt distant, always checking his phone, less affectionate. I confided in my best friend, Lena. She told me it was probably just pre-wedding nerves, nothing to worry about. Her advice? Plan a date night, something to reconnect. I took her suggestion. It was a disaster. Throughout dinner, Henry barely engaged, his mind clearly somewhere else. And then, just as I brought up finalizing our honeymoon plans, he dropped it. The bomb I never saw coming. I don't know if I'm ready for all this. Not just the honeymoon, not just the wedding, all of it. The marriage, the commitment, United States. I felt like the air had been knocked out of me. 5 years together, 8 months engaged. And now, suddenly, he wasn't sure? I pressed him, demanding answers. He mumbled something about conversations with Paul, about how marriage changes things. He brought up Paul's brother's ugly divorce, how it had been a wake-up call. The more he talked, the more I realized he had been building this doubt for weeks, maybe months, and saying nothing. Our quiet dinner turned into a barely contained argument, my hands shaking under the table as I tried not to cause a scene. We barely touched our food. The drive home was thick with silence, suffocating. Back at our apartment, he refused to talk any further, said he needed time to think before crashing on the couch. The next morning was unbearable. We moved around each other like strangers, avoiding eye contact, barely speaking. At one point, he muttered something about meeting Paul and some other work friends for lunch at the Rusty Nail, a sports bar downtown. I was too emotionally drained to argue. A few hours later, Lena convinced me to get out of the apartment for coffee. I told her everything, pouring it all out while she listened, patient as ever. "Maybe it's just pre-wedding anxiety," she offered gently. I wanted to believe that. After coffee, we wandered around Target aimlessly, my usual stress relief. By early evening, I felt a little steadier, like I could finally breathe again. I decided to head home. Just as I was pulling into our apartment complex, my phone buzzed. A text. Kylar, one of Henry's coworkers, a guy I'd only met once at their company Christmas party. "Hey, are you okay? Things got weird at the Rusty Nail." My stomach dropped. Instead of texting back, I called. Kylar hesitated at first, his voice tight with discomfort. I could hear the reluctance. But with some pressing, he finally told me what had happened. At some point during the afternoon, the conversation had turned to marriage. Someone joked about being with one woman forever. Henry, already several drinks in, blurted out something he probably thought was hilarious. "If you were prettier, I'd be more excited about marrying you." And then, he laughed, like it was nothing. Kylar told me that a few guys at the table immediately called him out for it, but Henry just brushed it off, like a joke. By the time I got home, he was passed out on the couch, still in the same clothes. The apartment reeked of stale beer. I didn't wake him. I just grabbed Beans, our dog, and took him into the bedroom, locking the door behind me. Sunday morning, I woke up to the smell of coffee and bacon. Henry's usual apology breakfast. He immediately tried to brush it off, blaming the alcohol and his own stupidity. According to him, the guys had been teasing him about settling down, and in an effort to shut them up, he'd blurted out something thoughtless. His attempt to justify it as just guys being guys only made things worse. We fought, me demanding to know how he could humiliate me like that, him insisting it was never his intention. The argument spiraled until I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my things and left, driving straight to Elliot's place. My brother has always been my safe haven when things go south. The moment I told him what happened, he was livid, ready to storm over and confront Henry himself. It took everything in me to calm him down, telling him I didn't need a fight. I needed space, time to think, and a place to stay while I figured out what to do next. The rest of Sunday was a blur, emotions crashing over me in waves. Then in the evening, I got a call from Henry's mom, Valerie. She and I had always gotten along well. In some ways, she'd been more supportive of my relationship with Henry than my own mother, who was too busy living in Florida with husband number 3. Valerie sounded unsettled, her voice edged with concern. She told me Henry had called her the night before, and there was something I needed to know. She wouldn't say more over the phone, just asked if we could meet in person. And that's where I am now, sitting here, staring at my engagement ring, wondering if my 5-year relationship is already beyond saving. I never imagined myself writing something like this, never thought I'd be questioning everything I thought I knew about the man I was supposed to marry. Had I been blind this whole time? Or had things truly unraveled this fast? Should I even listen to Valerie? What could she possibly tell me that would make any of this okay? First update. First, thank you all for the overwhelming support on my original post. I never expected thousands of comments, each one a mix of advice, validation, and tough love. Between crying fits and stress eating my brother's emergency stash of Oreos, I read through them all. A lot has happened in the past 2 days, and honestly, I'm still trying to process it. After posting on Monday, I called in sick to work again. My boss was understanding. I rarely take time off, and apparently, I sounded like I was on the verge of death over the phone. I spent most of the morning curled up in Elliot's guest room, scrolling through comments, trying to gather my thoughts. Around noon, Lena stopped by during her lunch break, bringing sandwiches from that deli near the hospital where she works. I hadn't eaten much since Sunday, so even though my stomach was in knots, I forced down a few bites. Lena, ever the voice of reason, gently reminded me that avoiding Henry forever wasn't an option. We lived together. We had joint accounts. Sooner or later, we'd have to talk. And she was right, of course. That night, Elliot's girlfriend was coming over for Taco Tuesday, and the last thing I wanted was to sit there as the sad, heartbroken third wheel. So after Lena left, I took a long shower, borrowed one of Elliot's oversized hoodies, don't judge, it was comforting, and made up my mind. I was going home. I wasn't going to yell, I wasn't going to cry. I was going to be calm, collected, and get the answers I deserved. Driving back to our apartment felt surreal, my hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary. When I pulled into our complex, I spotted Henry's truck. As I climbed the stairs to our second-floor unit, my heart pounded, my mind rehearsing what I wanted to say. I unlocked the door, stepping inside to find him slumped on the couch in sweatpants, looking exhausted, like he hadn't slept in days. Surrounding him were all the wedding planning binders I had painstakingly put together over the past 8 months. Next to him, curled up without a care in the world, was Beans, our dog, the little traitor. Henry looked up, startled, then visibly relieved to see me. When I asked why he wasn't at work, he admitted he had taken some personal time. He tried to tell me he'd been thinking things through, but I cut him off. Looking at wedding plans isn't going to fix what you said. And then came the conversation I had been dreading. A long, difficult, exhausting conversation. He apologized again for the disgusting comment at the bar, calling it inexcusable, swearing up and down that he didn't even believe it. Then why say it? I pushed. He hesitated, then admitted he'd been trying to look cool in front of his friends, a confession that only made my anger flare all over again. But I didn't let it consume me. Instead, I laid everything out, reminding him that the bar incident wasn't the only problem. I brought up the distant way he'd been acting, the half-hearted responses, the doubts he voiced over dinner before that night ever happened. Slowly, the truth started to unravel. He admitted he'd been overwhelmed, stressed about everything, a work project falling behind schedule, Paul's constant horror stories about marriage, anxiety over the wedding budget. But instead of talking to me, instead of leaning on me, he bottled it all up until it exploded in the worst way possible. And then finally, he told me something I hadn't expected. He was terrified of turning into his father. Henry rarely spoke about his father, the man who walked out when he was 12, leaving behind a wife and son to chase a new life with a coworker in Arizona. For years, Henry had insisted his father's betrayal hadn't left a mark on him, that he was fine, unaffected. But now, in the dim quiet of our apartment, he admitted something that made my stomach turn. He worried, deeply, irrationally, that the same flaw ran in his blood, that he was somehow wired to cheat, to leave, to destroy a family the way his father had. I tried to reason with him, told him he wasn't his father, that genetics weren't some unbreakable fate. But his response revealed more than he probably meant it to. "How can I promise forever?" he said, voice heavy with doubt, "when forever has never looked real to me?" The words sat between us, sharp and unmoving. I asked if he'd talked to anyone else about this, if anyone else knew what he was feeling. He hesitated before admitting that he'd been confiding in Kyler, who had apparently gone through something similar. And suddenly, things clicked into place. Kyler had already known about Henry's doubts. That's why he'd reached out after the bar incident. He'd known before I did. The conversation twisted into something even more painful when I pressed further, asking Henry to be completely honest about what he had been feeling. His answer was raw, cutting through whatever illusions I had left. He was scared, overwhelmed, torn between the love he had for me and the fear that we were making a mistake. He couldn't stop thinking about how his parents had seemed perfectly fine, until suddenly they weren't. How love could slip through your fingers before you even realized it was gone. He was terrified of putting us in that same position. I demanded to know why he hadn't told me all of this sooner, why he had let me believe everything was fine while he sat with this doubt for months. He looked at me then, his face unreadable. "Because I didn't want you to think I didn't love you." The irony was suffocating. By keeping his fears to himself, he had created the exact distance he claimed to be afraid of. But there was one thing I needed to understand, one thing I couldn't ignore. Did he mean what he said at the bar? Was his joke about my appearance rooted in some unspoken truth? I braced myself for the worst. But Henry shook his head immediately. He told me he had always been drawn to me, that he remembered exactly what I was wearing the night we met, my green sweater, the way I laughed at his terrible beer pong skills. According to him, the comment had come from a place of insecurity, a desperate attempt to appear in control in front of his friends, to seem like he had the upper hand instead of looking trapped. Then I asked the one question that truly mattered. Was it marriage he was afraid of, or was it marrying me? His hesitation was all the answer I needed. When he finally spoke, he tried to soften the blow. His doubts, he said, were mostly about marriage itself, about commitment, about whether forever was something he was even capable of. But then came the words that hit harder than any of it. "I also wonder if we're really right for each other long term." 5 years, and he was still wondering. The weight of it all pressed against my chest, unbearable. He started listing specifics, how we had both changed since our early 20s, how I had become more structured, more focused on planning, when I used to be more spontaneous, how he had once dreamed of starting his own business, but had long since let that ambition fade. I argued that change was a part of every relationship, that people grew and adapted together. But he wasn't sure if that's what we had done. He wasn't sure if we had grown together or if we had grown apart. I felt drained, completely, utterly drained. I told him I needed space, time to process everything, his humiliating drunken comment, his buried fears, his uncertainty about us. He begged me to work through it with him, to try therapy, couples counseling, anything to fix what was breaking between us. But I stood firm. I needed to step away before I drowned in all of this. As I started packing some clothes, he suddenly mentioned my phone had been buzzing. I picked it up and saw 3 missed calls from Valerie. In the whirlwind of everything that had happened, I had completely forgotten about our planned coffee meeting. When I mentioned it to Henry, his expression shifted. First confusion, then something sharper. Concern. What did my mom want to talk about? I told him she had called me crying the morning before, saying she needed to talk. His reaction was instant. The color drained from his face and he wouldn't meet my eyes. Alarm rang in my head. I asked him what exactly he had told her. He mumbled something vague about their argument, about him confessing his doubts to her, but something felt off. I pressed harder, demanding to know what he wasn't saying. He swallowed and shook his head. "It's not my place to explain," he said, voice hollow. "You should hear it from her." My stomach twisted with unease as I stepped away to call Valerie back. She picked up immediately, her voice thick with concern. But it wasn't just about Henry. It was me she was worried about, and that only made my suspicion grow. After arranging to meet Valerie in 30 minutes, I turned back to Henry, demanding to know what his mother had figured out before I did. He finally met my gaze, his face a mixture of guilt and reluctant acceptance. He admitted there was something he should have told me himself, but hadn't. Then, with a sigh, he suggested I speak to his mother instead, offering to be gone by the time I got back. "Sometimes love just isn't enough," he muttered before looking away. On my way to meet Valerie, my phone rang. Clara, Henry's sister. She sounded worried, immediately asking what was going on between Henry and me. She mentioned hearing from Paul about what had happened at the bar and pointed out that Henry had been ignoring her texts, while their mom seemed unusually upset. The moment I told her I was heading to meet Valerie, there was a sharp inhale on the other end of the line. Her reaction, shock, followed by a quick attempt to backtrack, told me she had just let something slip. She apologized but wouldn't explain, only urging me to listen to whatever Valerie had to say. No matter how much I pushed, she refused to give anything away. When I pulled into the coffee shop parking lot, my stomach was in knots. Through the large front window, I spotted Valerie sitting alone at a corner booth. She looked exhausted, her eyes red and swollen, as if she had spent the entire morning crying. Whatever she was about to tell me, I had a sinking feeling it was going to change everything. I silenced my phone, exhaled deeply, and made my way inside. Second update. Thank you all for your support on my previous posts. Reading your comments has been overwhelming in the best and worst ways. I haven't had the chance to respond to many, but I've read them all, and I truly appreciate the advice. Right now, I'm writing this from a different place. Not Elliot's, and definitely not our apartment. Lena's pull-out couch is slightly better than Elliot's storage room futon, and at least her cat, Pepper, doesn't judge me for crying into my cereal at 2 a.m. So, the meeting with Valerie. Where do I even begin? The coffee shop was unusually packed for a Tuesday afternoon. A group of students, fresh out of community college classes, had taken over most of the tables, their laptops open, coffee cups half empty. Valerie had managed to grab a secluded booth, the kind with high backs that gave a sense of privacy. I had just seen her 3 weeks ago at our usual family dinner, but the woman sitting in front of me looked nothing like her usual self. Her sleek bob was slightly disheveled, and for the first time since I had known her, she wasn't wearing a trace of makeup. Valerie wasn't the type to obsess over appearances. It was just part of her routine, like how some people needed coffee before they could function. When I approached, she stood up to hug me. The familiar scent of lavender dryer sheets clung to her clothes. I ordered a black coffee, even though what I really wanted was something drowning in whipped cream, something comforting. But for some reason, ordering anything indulgent felt wrong given the conversation ahead. After a few minutes of hesitant small talk, Valerie got to the point. Henry had called her on Sunday night in full-blown emotional meltdown. She acknowledged his fears, his anxiety about commitment, his deep-rooted dread of turning into his father. But there was something else, something more immediate that had been driving his behavior. Maria. I nearly choked on my coffee. Maria? The new project coordinator at Henry's company? The woman he had only ever mentioned in passing? Valerie's fingers fidgeted with a napkin, tearing it into tiny shreds as she explained. Over the past few months, Henry had developed feelings for Maria. He swore nothing physical had happened, not yet at least. But there was something emotional, something significant enough to make him question everything about our relationship. I sat frozen, the world around me tilting sideways as I tried to make sense of it all. While Valerie kept talking, my mind was already racing, tracing back through the last few months, connecting the dots. Maria had started at his company earlier this year. I had met her briefly at the holiday party in March. By then, Henry had already begun to act differently, more distant, glued to his phone, spending extra hours with his work friends. I had told myself it was just stress from a big project. But now it looked like something else entirely. I forced myself to meet Valerie's eyes. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Why not just protect your son?" Her expression crumbled. Tears welled up as she exhaled shakily. And suddenly I understood. She wasn't just telling me as Henry's mother. She was telling me as a woman who had lived through this before. Valerie confided that before Henry's father left for Arizona with his new girlfriend, he had spent months doing exactly this, creating distance, making cruel remarks, starting unnecessary arguments, all to push her away instead of admitting the truth. She had ignored the signs back then, convincing herself things would get better, and she didn't want me to make the same mistake. The comment at the bar suddenly made perfect sense. It wasn't just drunken stupidity. It was something deeper, an unconscious effort to wreck our relationship so he wouldn't have to make the difficult decision himself. Valerie and I talked for over an hour. She opened up about her own past, about the way she had once blamed herself for not being enough. Before we parted ways in the parking lot, she left me with a truth that had been echoing in my mind ever since. The hardest lesson I ever learned? You can't force someone to choose you. They either do or they don't, and anything in between is just dragging out the inevitable. I sat in my car long after she left, staring blankly at my phone. 3 unread messages from Henry, all variations of the same thing, excuses, half-hearted attempts to explain. I ignored them. Instead, I called Lena and asked if I could crash at her place. She didn't hesitate, didn't ask for details, just told me she was already setting up the pull-out couch and would grab dinner on her way home. That's the kind of friend everyone deserves when their world is falling apart. Finally, I texted Henry back. "I know about Maria. Don't contact me again until you're ready to tell me the whole truth. I'll be by tomorrow while you're at work to pick up more of my things." I didn't want his excuses. I didn't need his justifications. On my way to Lena's, my phone lit up with another call. Clara. I hesitated before answering, but something told me I needed to hear what she had to say. The conversation only confirmed what Valerie had already told me, adding another layer to the mess. She had overheard Henry and Paul talking about the situation last Thursday. She had confronted her brother, made him promise to be honest with me after the weekend. Clearly, that promise had meant nothing. But what shocked me most wasn't his deception. It was Clara's unwavering support. Despite being his sister, she made it clear. She was on my side. That night, Lena's apartment became exactly what I needed. A place where I didn't have to explain myself, where I could just exist. We ate Thai food on the floor, her coffee table buried under papers from an online class she was taking. A baking competition played on the TV, neither of us really paying attention. The quiet normalcy of it all felt like a lifeline in the middle of my emotional wreckage. At some point, I found myself scrolling through old photos on my phone, 5 years of memories with Henry, vacations, holidays, silly selfies from uneventful days, our engagement photos, both of us grinning like we had just won the lottery. I was already making mental plans for the next day. Head to the apartment while he was at work, pack more of my things, maybe talk to the landlord about breaking the lease. Then my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "Margot, this is Maria." My pulse pounded in my ears. I stared at the screen, my mind racing. What more could there possibly be? And why would she want to speak to me directly? After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a few minutes, I typed out a response. Where and when? 3rd update. First, thank you all for the overwhelming support on my previous posts. I've spent sleepless nights reading your comments and, well, let's just say, none of this has gone the way I expected. We met at this little breakfast cafe near the park, a neutral space, I suppose. When I arrived, she was already there, scrolling nervously through her phone. She looked different than I remembered from the company party. Less polished, more real. Her hair was thrown up in a messy bun, barely any makeup on her face. But what caught me off guard was her discomfort. If she had been carrying on some secret affair with my fiance, wouldn't she have been more confident? More? Assured? Instead, she fidgeted with her coffee cup, avoiding my eyes. And then she dropped 2 bombshells. First, Maria had no idea Henry had feelings for her until Paul casually mentioned it last week. From her perspective, they had worked together on a project, occasionally texting about work after hours, but that was it. Nothing flirtatious. Nothing that hinted at anything deeper. Second, she showed me their text history, and it was nothing. Work-related messages, the occasional meme, no flirting, no late-night confessions, no inappropriate exchanges, nothing that should have led to this. She even had a boyfriend of 3 years, someone who occasionally tagged along for their happy hour gatherings. But the second revelation hit harder. It was about Paul. Apparently, he had been the one stirring the pot all along. Maria had overheard him at work, subtly encouraging Henry to explore his options before settling down. He had even gone as far as to mention her by name, implying that she understands Henry better than I do. She explained that Paul had been running his mouth to their coworkers, making cracks about Henry getting cold feet, about how marriage would trap him, about how he was losing his freedom. The more she spoke, the more I realized that Paul wasn't just a bad influence. He was actively undermining us. By the time we finished talking, I felt unexpectedly calm. Maria wasn't the person I had built up in my head. She wasn't some scheming villain, just a bystander caught in the middle of Paul's toxicity and Henry's weakness. Before we parted, she left me with something that stayed with me long after. You seem like someone who knows their worth. Don't let anyone make you question it. I walked away with a new sense of clarity and a plan. This wasn't just about Henry's doubts. It was about Paul's manipulation, about Henry's family history, and about where I stood in all of it. Afterward, I texted Clara, asking if she'd help me set up a family meeting at her apartment. Neutral ground. I wasn't ready to be alone with Henry yet. She agreed without hesitation. Which brings me to last night's dinner. Clara had arranged everything in her small but welcoming apartment, ordering takeout from the Italian spot near her place. Nothing extravagant, just pasta and salad. Valerie was already there when I arrived. She had made it clear to Henry that he would be attending. And finally, there he was, walking in looking exhausted, like sleep had been a distant memory. The first 20 minutes were agonizing. We sat around Clara's dining table, pushing food around on our plates, making stiff small talk about the weather and her new coffee table. The unspoken tension hung so thick in the air, it could have taken a seat at the table itself. No one wanted to be the first to acknowledge it. Finally, Valerie cut through the silence, blunt as ever. We're not here to catch up. We need to talk about what's really going on. And just like that, the dam broke. I laid everything out, what I had learned from Maria, keeping my eyes locked on Paul the entire time. I watched as his expression shifted, first to confusion, then to defense. He tried to cut in, insisting he had only been looking out for his friend, but Clara shut him down before he could spin any more lies. Meanwhile, Henry sat there, barely touching his plate, staring at the table like he wanted to disappear. When I turned to him directly, he admitted that Maria had never been anything more than friendly, but that he had let his own insecurities cloud his judgment. I didn't want to end up like Dad, he mumbled, voice thick with something unspoken. Across the table, Valerie flinched. Then I brought up the joke at the bar. The moment I mentioned it, Henry's face fell. He looked truly ashamed. He admitted that it had never been about Maria. It had never been about my looks. It was about him, his own cowardice. Paul had been pressuring him, teasing him about being whipped, and instead of standing his ground, he had said something cruel just to fit in. He had thrown me under the bus to seem cool. According to Henry, it had never been about me. Paul scoffed, brushing the whole thing off as just guys messing around. That was when I looked him dead in the eye and quietly said the words that had been sitting in my chest for weeks. The wedding isn't happening. Silence. Henry started to protest, but I didn't let him. I laid it all out, how I had spent the last few months watching him drift further and further away, watching him become someone I barely recognized, how I had made excuses for his disinterest in wedding planning, his growing distance, his time with Paul, because it was easier than facing the truth. I deserve someone who is sure about me, I said, someone who doesn't need a damn intervention to figure out how they feel. Paul made a snide remark about me being dramatic. At that, both Valerie and Clara turned on him at the same time. "Shut up, Paul," they snapped in unison. Henry insisted that he was sure about loving me, that he was just scared of messing everything up. I looked him in the eye and told him, "You already have." The conversation stretched on for hours. There were tears. There were arguments. There were truths that had been buried for years, finally dragged into the light. Clara and Paul nearly came to blows. We reopened old wounds and uncovered new ones. By the time midnight rolled around, we'd exhausted every emotion, every possible argument, and arrived at the only conclusion left to reach. The wedding was off. 5 years together, and it had come to this. There was no dramatic explosion, no bitter accusations hurled in anger, just a quiet mutual understanding that something essential between us had broken beyond repair. Trust. Maybe in time, it could be pieced back together, but not fast enough for an October wedding. Not while Maria was still working at Henry's office. Not with that awful joke still lingering in the air between us. Clara drove me back to Lena's place afterward. On the way, she reassured me that none of this would change my relationship with her or with Valerie. I nodded, numb, barely processing her words. According to her, I didn't cry at first. Instead, I pulled out my phone and opened my notes app, mechanically making a list. Call venue to cancel, deposit is probably gone, return ring, contact guests, move out, change relationship status on social media, the logistics of an unraveling life. It was past 2 a.m. when Lena shuffled out of her bedroom, bleary-eyed but immediately understanding. When I told her the wedding was off, she didn't say anything, just sat down beside me on the pull-out couch and wrapped an arm around my shoulders. We stayed like that until the sun came up, silent, existing in the strange, hollow space that used to be my future. This morning, I woke up to a text from Henry. He wanted to meet and discuss practical matters, the apartment lease, our joint finances, what to do with the furniture we had bought together. So adult, so final. Elliot had also messaged, asking when he should come over to help me pack. My brother, always the pragmatic one. And then there was my mom's text. Somehow she'd already heard, probably from a cousin who followed Clara on Instagram. She wanted to know if she should cancel her flight for the wedding. The ring on my finger feels heavier now. I've been twisting it absently, a nervous tick I never even noticed before. It's a simple design, a round diamond set in white gold. Nothing extravagant, nothing flashy. Henry picked it because it was classic, like us. I called the venue this morning. The coordinator was kind but firm. The deposit was non-refundable this close to the date. $8,000, a year's worth of savings. The vacations we didn't take, the dinners we skipped, the new clothes we never bought, gone. My practical side flinches at the loss. The rest of me barely registers it. Clara texted, saying she'd found a photographer willing to transfer our deposit to another event. Valerie, unsurprisingly, sent a vague, hollow message about how everything happens for a reason and how I'd find someone better eventually. I deleted it without replying. Maria also reached out, brief, apologetic, once again insisting that nothing happened between her and Henry. And strangely, I believe her. She feels like collateral damage in all of this, a convenient scapegoat for Henry's cold feet. But the hardest part isn't the people. It's the small, quiet reminders of a future that no longer exists. The wedding planning binder still stuffed in my tote bag. The shared Spotify playlist we had been curating for the reception. The folder on my laptop labeled Honeymoon Ideas. All the little pieces of what was supposed to be our life together. Lena suggested I take a mental health day from work. Instead, I went in. Sitting at home, spiraling on Reddit and overanalyzing every detail seemed worse than answering phones and filing insurance claims. My coworkers were mercifully normal. Either they didn't know yet, or they were tactful enough to pretend not to notice the missing ring on my finger and the exhaustion in my face. Tomorrow, I'm meeting Henry at a coffee shop to exchange keys and sort out the apartment situation. Since my name is on the lease, he agreed to move out. He'll be staying with his cousin for now. Another pragmatic conversation in the slow, painful process of dismantling a 5-year relationship. A month ago, we were debating reception menus. Now we're dividing furniture. It's messy. It's sad. It's complicated. My mother told me last night that heartbreaks like these always feel impossible until they aren't. She would know. She rebuilt her life after Henry's father walked out, raised 2 kids on her own, and eventually found happiness again. Looking at her now, you'd never guess how much pain she had endured. Maybe there's something comforting in that. For now, I'm just taking it one day at a time. Tomorrow, I'll deal with the apartment and finances. The future feels blurry, but at least it's still there. Clara just texted, asking if I wanted to grab coffee this weekend. She mentioned that her family friend Kenzo, an older man who had been in their lives forever, offered me his vacation cabin if I needed some time away. I wasn't expecting this kind of kindness from Henry's family, but I appreciate it more than I can say. I haven't decided if I'll take him up on his offer yet. A part of me longs to disappear somewhere quiet, somewhere I can sit with my thoughts and unravel everything that's happened. But I know better. Right now, I need my people, Lena, with her steady, practical kindness, Elliot, who carries the weight of an older brother's fierce protectiveness, even Valerie and Clara, whose loyalties are tangled but unwavering in their own way. What I do know is that I won't be checking my wedding countdown app anymore. I won't be pinning reception decor ideas or practicing a new signature with Henry's last name. That future is gone. And while I have no idea what comes next, I'm beginning to believe that something will. This is my last update. It feels surreal, typing these words from a different apartment, in a different version of my life than the one I thought I'd be living. Somehow, I've been piecing myself back together in ways I never saw coming. Some of you have reached out, asking how things turned out. So here it is. The good, the bad, and the parts I never expected. First, the logistics. Henry moved out within a week of our breakup. Lena and Elliot came over while he was at work, helping me pack up his things, carefully labeled, stacked neatly in the living room for him to collect. It felt like dividing up the remnants of a life that just weeks ago had felt unshakable. The weekend trip to that little mountain town, the framed pictures we had hung on every wall. The apartment felt hollow afterward, like a place I had only borrowed, not a home I had built. I lasted 2 more weeks before the lease manager agreed to let me break the contract in exchange for an extra month's rent. It was worth every penny to escape the ghost of us lingering in that space. Finding a new place was harder than I expected. The rental market is a nightmare right now, and without a second income, my budget was suddenly much tighter. Eventually, I settled on a small 1-bedroom across town, further from work, but it has a tiny balcony where I've started growing herbs in mismatched pots from the dollar store. The basil refuses to stay alive, but the mint thrives against all odds. I've decided to take that as a sign. Financially, the adjustment has been real. Things I never used to think twice about, car insurance, streaming services, groceries, suddenly feel like luxuries when you're paying for everything on your own. I've become the kind of person who clips coupons, buys store brands, and tracks every expense in a spreadsheet. Grown-up things I never thought I'd have to learn at 29. Surprisingly, most of the wedding vendors were understanding. The venue kept our deposit but sent a handwritten note wishing me happiness, which was unexpectedly kind. The florist, despite their strict no-refund policy, returned half of what we had paid. The DJ, of all people, recommended his brother, a therapist. It was an odd but thoughtful gesture. As for the engagement ring, it's still in my dresser drawer, tucked away in its original box. Henry said I could keep it or sell it, that it carried bad karma for him now. I'm not sure what I want to do with it yet. Some days, I forget it's even there. Other days, I open the box and stare at it, turning it over in my fingers, wondering how something so small could have once held so many promises. Social media was its own unique form of hell. I waited 2 weeks before changing my relationship status, bracing for the inevitable flood of questions. And when I finally did it, at 2 a.m. on a random Tuesday, the notifications came in anyway. Well-meaning friends with their "what happened?" messages, distant relatives offering prayers, old classmates who had barely spoken to me in years, suddenly appearing in my DMs, feigning concern that felt more like curiosity. I posted a short, vague statement about mutual decisions and the need for privacy, then muted my notifications and threw my phone onto the couch. Later, I posted a single photo, my new apartment keys in the palm of my hand. The caption? New beginnings. It didn't get as many likes as my engagement announcement, but somehow, it felt more real. Now, about Henry. We've spoken a handful of times since the breakup, mostly about practical things, mail that ended up at the wrong address, the shared cloud storage we forgot to separate, returning a borrowed air fryer to his sister. Each conversation has been polite but strained, the kind of small talk exchanged between acquaintances stuck in an elevator. He's still at the same company, still friends with Paul, though according to Clara, there's been some falling out between them, still living at his cousin's place. According to the grapevine, or as I like to call her, Clara, things between Henry and Maria became strained after our breakup. Not long after learning the full story, she put in a request to transfer to another team, and ever since, she's been noticeably distant toward him. But the real surprise came last month when Henry reached out. He texted, asking if we could meet. We hadn't seen each other in person since that awkward, stilted key exchange at the apartment. And despite myself, part of me was curious. I agreed, but only under controlled conditions. A coffee shop near my new place, neutral ground, plenty of witnesses, just as Lena half-jokingly insisted. He looked different, thinner, dark circles under his eyes, wearing a shirt I didn't recognize. The first 10 minutes were nothing but filler. Small talk about work, the weather, meaningless chatter neither of us really cared about. And then he pulled out a journal. "I've been seeing someone," he said. For a split second, my heart hesitated. But before I could even process what that meant, he clarified, "A therapist, I mean." The journal was part of his sessions, daily reflections on his behavior, the patterns he wanted to change. He had been unraveling his past, examining his relationship with his father, his friendship with Paul, and ultimately, the way he had treated me. He didn't ask for forgiveness, didn't try to rewrite history or seek reconciliation. "You deserved better," he admitted. "I should have done this years ago. Maybe things would have turned out differently." For the first time, he seemed self-aware. And oddly enough, I found myself hoping therapy would help him. Not because it meant anything for me, that ship had long since sailed, but because carrying around that much unresolved family trauma had to be exhausting. Before we parted, he brought up something unexpected. "I heard you're still close with my mom and Valerie." His voice was quiet, almost careful. "I'm glad." In a way, I had kept the family while cutting him out. Valerie still texts me every week, usually sending memes or updates on her garden. Clara and I meet for breakfast every other Sunday at a little diner halfway between our apartments. They've been careful, never oversharing, never putting me in uncomfortable positions, respecting the boundaries I set. As for me, I wish I could say this breakup led to some grand epiphany, some profound self-discovery. But the truth is, healing is messier than that. Some days I feel strong, independent, like I'm reclaiming parts of myself I didn't even realize I had lost. Other days, like when my hot water heater acts up or I can't reach something on the top shelf, I miss the simple, practical comforts of partnership. I've started therapy too. Not because of the breakup itself, but because it made me realize just how much of myself I had compromised in that relationship. How many red flags I had ignored simply because they felt familiar. How easy it was to shrink myself to fit inside someone else's world. I've also gone back to hiking on Saturday mornings, something I used to love but had stopped doing because Henry always complained about waking up early on weekends. Dating again? That still feels like a distant concept. My coworkers have started hinting about setting me up with someone. "He's a great guy," they insist. But I'm not ready. Maybe in a few months, maybe longer. For now, I'm still figuring things out. I ignored the reminder in my calendar about canceling the honeymoon reservation. I just couldn't bring myself to lose one more thing. Then Lena made a wild suggestion. "Take the trip anyway. Go by yourself." "You've never traveled alone," she pointed out. "Maybe it's time." At first, the idea terrified me. 10 days alone in a romantic cottage meant for two? It sounded like some twisted joke. But the more I sat with it, the more appealing it became. I could wake up whenever I wanted, explore at my own pace, read an entire book in one sitting without anyone interrupting me. So next week, that's exactly what I'm doing. I'm taking a honeymoon solo. I packed 3 paperbacks, downloaded a handful of podcasts, and even splurged on a new swimsuit, picking one entirely for comfort rather than how it might look to someone else. My mom thinks I've lost it. "Might as well download a dating app while you're at it," she joked. Maybe, but probably not. I don't know what I'll find on this trip. Maybe clarity, maybe more questions. Definitely a sunburn, given my history with sunscreen. The other day, I was grocery shopping when our song started playing over the store speakers. 3 months ago, it would have sent me straight to the frozen food aisle, hiding behind bags of peas, fighting back tears. This time, I just felt a dull ache, like pressing on a bruise that's almost healed. Progress, not perfection. I'm not going to pretend I have everything figured out. My new apartment's shower has mysterious temperature swings. I killed another basil plant yesterday. And sometimes, just for a second, I still pick up my phone to text Henry something funny before remembering. We don't do that anymore.